Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we have data masons with us, and they will be presenting on EDI made simple for Dynamics NAV. We have Brian Lynch who will be presenting the webinar today. And we just ask that if you have any questions, please go ahead and type them into the questions box, and we will get them called out toward the end of the webinar. And we do record all of our webinars, so this will be recorded and available on our website later this week for you to review again, or you can share it with any of your colleagues and friends. So now I'll turn it over to Brian, and he will begin our presentation.
Well, great. Well, Angie, thank you so much. And for those of you online live, as well as watching this in recording, in our hour together here, as you can see in the slide, we're really going to be talking about the notion of integrated EDI for your Microsoft Dynamics NAV system, and specifically, that integration without embedded customizations. Just as a brief introduction, if you're unfamiliar, Data Masons is an EDI company focused on the Microsoft Dynamics community, and so a long history with the Dynamics NAV platform and the newer direction of Microsoft with Dynamics 365. And so we've been doing this for 20 years, over 1,500 customers, and as you can see, Microsoft has certified our solution to work. I have personally been doing this for quite a few years myself, all 20 of those years. And so as we go through, really my goal here is to share some experience that we've had other customers report to us and some of the pros and cons to some of the different types of EDI integrations. So with that, I know we have a kind of a wide audience here today, so I've prepared a little bit of an EDI 101. We definitely have additional materials on our website as well as other webinars that we've done, but just to do a little bit of level setting. With that, we're also going to talk through some of the overall integration challenges with EDI. As we get into some of the approaches, recognizing some of the inefficiencies, and specifically, we'll talk a little bit about how Data Masons has went through to address some of these challenges. And time permitting, we'll go ahead and get into a demonstration. And as Angie said, towards the end, we'll open it up to any questions and answers that the group has. So with that, EDI, electronic data interchange, is really the notion that you are electronically trading typically key supply chain documents with your business partners. And so they're in the middle, running Microsoft Dynamics. You might be looking to automate, for instance, your business-to-business customers with things like incoming sales orders, outbound PO acknowledgments, outbound advanced ship notices, invoices, etc. And so depending on what industry that you're in, for instance, consumer packaged goods, even manufacturing, as you get into food and bev, a lot of times these large national accounts, your customers, will require an integrated EDI program for you. Now, we are seeing more and more industries leverage this automation. And if you think about the business benefit to both you and your trading community, it helps to reduce costs, it increases accuracy, and it also increases the velocity. And so, for instance, drop shipping. As a society, we're now getting used to, picking up our phone and just being able to kind of instantly order products. And so, a lot of that is enabled through EDI technology. Again, that business-to-business communication. But as you expand, that same technology can be used to automate carriers, tendering loads, getting status of the shipment. As you think about your suppliers and your vendors, leveraging the investment that you've made with NAV to now automate, you sending out purchase orders, receiving advanced ship notices, etc. We even get involved with, brokers and marketplaces. So for instance, Amazon and some of the other different areas that are out there. And so really leveraging the investment that you've made in Dynamics to then automate, these key supply chain documents. Now, this tends to be a volume-based decision. So if you're doing one order, a month, that may not make sense to automate. Obviously, if you're doing hundreds or thousands or more, the business case is typically very quick and easy to cost justify. Now, when we think of the words EDI, again, electronic data interchange, that is a standard. However, it's typically a reference to a very specific standard. If you think about email or text messages, etc., they're electronic, they're data, and you've exchanged them. So here in North America, for instance, you'll often hear when people say EDI, actually what they mean is a reference to ANSI X12. Now, unfortunately, I've been doing this for so long, I can read that off to the left there. And what this is simply doing is it's showing us a purchase order. So the beginning, where to ship it to, and ultimately goes through line items and details of the line items, etc. Now, these standards, which literally document about 1,000 different document types, such as a purchase order, that purchase order standard will then get into all of the possibilities of the various records that are possible and optional and mandated. Within that, the fields, or what they call elements. So these standards kind of dictate what needs to happen. But the notion of electronically trading is not always limited to, kind of formal ANSI standards. And so, for instance, XML has definitely been growing in popularity, great for kind of one-on-one communications. There are some standards out there that also leverage XML. But as you can see, the difference here is it's both human readable, but also still computer readable. And that's one of the advantages. However, one of the disadvantages, actually several disadvantages, is, as you can see, it's a little bit more verbose. And so with that, we have a little bit more information to pass back and forth. The other area is the notion of what they are called tags. So PO number, in this example, we have PO underscore number. Well, you and I know that, but my next partner might call it PO num. Someone else might call it PO num £. Us as humans know that that's all the same. Unfortunately, for the computers, we have to kind of tell it those are all the same. Where with ANSI standards, there's one way to do it. And then off to the right here in the dark gray box, we have flat files. So comma delimited, CSVs, all again, same information, just presented in a little bit of a different fashion. With Vantage Point, the Data Mason solution, we support all of these and others. And this is very important as you establish your relationships to define, what standards are to be used, what method of communication are to be used, etc. And I always like to call out our friends Walmart off to the right here. And so their purchase order, they document a purchase order that takes about 120 pages. And so, if you think about shipping to a distribution center, shipping to a store, shipping to an end consumer, all of these types of shipments have different characteristics. For instance, what's called UCC 128 labeling or GS1 128 labeling often will get accommodated, for DC or store shipments. And so the additional information that needs to be transmitted to support the notion of automated receiving. And so these compliance guidelines go out for every partner, for every document, and detail out exactly what needs to happen between the two parties. And so one of the aspects of an integrated EDI program is understanding these and keeping up with the compliance updates. So as you look at different types of EDI, if we kind of go left to right, you can see here in regards to web forms. So for instance, our friends at Walmart has a solution called Retail Link. Essentially, it's a vendor portal where you can log in, print off your purchase orders, key in your invoices, get information, and be compliant. And so, as you can see, there's no integration. The cost is "quote unquote" free. You're simply spending the labor, to interact with it. This may have changed a little bit since the last time I looked, but the supplier community and the retail community, for instance, does recognize this is typically a smaller supplier. So, for instance, they actually limit how many orders that you can get this way. And I think the last count, it was like 100 orders. And so, unfortunately, you are limited to the amount of business that you can do with them. But again, works great, low volume, low partner count. As that continues to grow, you then have some choices, and you want to kind of think about not only your immediate need today, but also in the context of where am I going to be 6 months from now, or a year from now, or 2 years from now. For instance, dropship programs are, very hard to predict. Is that product really going to take off, etc. Whereas with some of the larger for instance, retailers, am I shipping regional? Am I shipping to the stores? Am I shipping to the DCs? That'll kind of control, how many orders and the volume that I get. So a software as a service or a cloud, kind of component can work good. Again, typically in lower volumes, multiple partners, has basic integration or, kind of third party. And again, we spend a couple $100 a month, a little bit upfront on integration, and again, typically works. In the middle there, you do have the translation tool, which would be for folks that, want to build their own solution. And then kind of off to the right, kind of a managed solution, which is where I think Data Masons would best fit, although we can actually enable folks that want to build their own. And so this tends to be for quote unquote medium to high volume. Now that term can vary from one organization to another, one industry to another. But these are solutions that have pre-built integration. The investment is usually starting at 20,000 plus. Leasing it or a subscription, oftentimes can bring that cost to 1,000 or so a month. And so the business case here is, again, that we're not having to, necessarily spend as much labor. We're reducing or eliminating chargebacks or penalty fines from our business partners. We're increasing the velocity of the transactions, etc. So again, usually the business case is pretty strong. Now, when you go to integrate, EDI to the ERP, the EDI syntax is, really probably 5 or 10% of the overall areas that need to be dealt with in order to actually, properly create that sales order. And so when you think about things like business rules, you get into the scenario of, my part number to your part number. Hey, if this is Amazon's order and it's this type of item, we do this special thing. Do we check for credit holds? So there's the areas that your operator may be physically going through when they key an order in, and now this EDI system now needs to automate it. You're also going to have unexpected scenarios. And so, for instance, a classic one might be, where you are obligated to track, key data points that, are coming over on the transmission. And so things like line item sequence number, department number, you have to be able to accommodate, this information that's coming over because you're oftentimes mandated to send it on the outbound transmission. You have the overall scalability. We have customers kind of on the higher end that are processing over 1 million sales line items a day. And when you're at that, kind of capacity, obviously throughput of the orders is critical. Scalability to not only handle transaction volume, but handle the different formats that may be needed, to handle the different business partners that are needed. Because again, as you, for instance, start off building something as a one-off for one customer, as you get to number 2, number 3, number 4, those areas can definitely change, even though, quote unquote, it's the EDI standards. The EDI standards do not say everyone has to do it the same. What the standard says is really more what are the possibilities. And the best analogy that I was given was if we think of our roadway systems, we have interstates and speed limits and stop signs, etc. But how you drive from, say, New York to California, there's choices along the path. And the same concepts apply here. A very big one, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, is the notion of NAV modifications. Sometimes these are things that you may want to do to support your business, but in of itself, EDI should not force NAV modifications. And so when you take that approach, for instance, in an embedded design, just being aware of some of the pros and cons to the embedded modified area. Data itself, so my part number to your part number, my address code to your address code, my warehouse code, department numbers, etc. Turning around turnaround data, again, fields that maybe the ERP natively does not process, but yet you're obligated to send on an outbound transaction. Duplicate data entry, oftentimes can be a challenge. What happens if a business partner resent a transaction, or if you need to modify things along those lines. And then if you think about, just any really ERP and definitely NAV and Dynamics in general, there's not really a native field, from Microsoft that says, aha, this is an EDI partner. And by the way, these are the specific documents that they do. And by the way, here's the specific formats that are needed and the rules within that format and the method of communication. And so all of that has to be defined so that the quote-unquote EDI system can fully participate. And so if you've started to go down that path, these are some of the things that I have seen over my 20-year career in regards to some of the things that can be inefficient. And one of the very first things here is, NAV upgrades are difficult or expensive. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but you're seeing Microsoft really make some tremendous investments into the NAV and what will now become the Dynamics 365 Business Central offering. And so the largest platform globally that Microsoft has for its ERP product lines, they're moving away from, customizing the core code. And so as Microsoft, does these, systems like an EDI that introduce a lot of modifications, can unfortunately impact the upgrade. You also get into situations where EDI support is lacking or split between multiple parties. We see this sometimes, for instance, with cloud providers. They'll handle the EDI transport, they'll quote unquote reformat the data, but they're not necessarily integrating the transactions in. They rely on another organization to do that. And so now you have this, where, if there's an issue, where did that occur? What needs to happen? And, as changes happen on EDI and as changes happen on the ERP side, the integration needs to be able to be the glue that pulls all of that together. This, unfortunately, is another area, chargebacks and transaction fees. And so this gets into areas where, especially in higher volume, where you have, paying 25, 50 cents a document, again, as you start to increase that volume, can be very expensive and taking away from kind of the bottom line. This purchase order generated that PO acknowledgement, which generated this ASN, which generated that invoice. That single PO, if everything's shipped complete, is actually going to generate 4 transactions. And so being able to potentially eliminate that transaction fee, through direct communication, again, Walmart, Amazon, et cetera, all support that, or being able to significantly reduce it if your customer does require what's called a value added network, or VAN. The other area is chargebacks, otherwise known as penalty fines. So a lot of times you are obligated to send over certain data within certain time frames, within certain specifications. And if those things do not align perfectly, unfortunately, you will get penalty fines. I've seen, $25 plus per box. If you think about how many boxes and cases some of these shipments have, penalties for shipments, $500. Unfortunately, done the wrong way, you can literally ship your customer free product, and it just obviously has a big impact. Optimization for automation is not optimal, and so this can take the form of a few different ways. The notion that who gets notified on success or audits, but also just the fact that did I have to click the button, versus the system automatically running. The data itself, as we talked about, EDI is actually many different standards, and then also you have non-standard EDI such as XML, CSV, positional files. Not all EDI solutions can handle those, so very critical. Tracking the turnaround data, my PO line item sequence, versus having to customize NAV in order to actually, track that value so that you can send it in later. And then partner onboarding can really take a long time. I've seen where, with a modified approach, sometimes these partners takes months to get up, where it really should take weeks, if not days. Now, the notion that it's a quote unquote plug and play, isn't EDI a standard? Why does it take so long? Unfortunately, the reality is that, you do have to set up some things on your side. More importantly, there is a back and forth that goes with some of these business partners. They may tell you, great, we're able to test and we've got an opening in 2 weeks. Nothing you can do, nothing your EDI provider can do, to quote unquote speed that up. And so just being mindful of the onboarding time. And unfortunately, I see these a lot, poor vendor scorecarding. And so the notion that, you're not shipping complete, you're not shipping accurately, your EDI system really should be able to help you with that, not only in the sense of the order to cash cycle with the PO acknowledgement, the ASN, but for instance, sharing your inventory visibility, having a very good and detailed PO acknowledgement back. Your business partners really should be able to understand, are you going to be in a shortage situation, if you're a make to stock kind of environment, or again, having good forecast details, if you're a make to order kind of situation. And so all of these things can play a role in regards to recognizing, the inefficiencies of the wrong model. So how do we make it simple? Again, tested over 20 plus years, many different Dynamics customers. The first thing I would say is this is a solution and not a tool. Can you use our solution to build your own maps and maintain everything on your own? Absolutely, yes, you can. But you didn't have to, go purchase a translator or develop a translator, go out and custom code an integration layer, etc. All of that is kind of the foundational level. But oftentimes, as you get into being able to build the maps, being able to actually outsource the EDI operations, those are all things that Data Masons does for our customers. The big difference also is our approach and our philosophy is no NAV customizations. We do not force modifications. Now, that being said, if you have made a modification that's relevant to your business, as you'll see here in the next few slides, very easy for us to adapt to those, but in of itself, EDI is not forcing those modifications. Again, as we talk more, very critical as Microsoft continues to increase the pace of their additional functionality. Our system is designed around the thought of automation, and management by exception. I got 1,000 orders in at 9 o'clock this morning. Number 37 had a problem. By the way, I know that this particular person is who handles that account. That's the person that needs to get the notification. By the way, we don't want a bunch of hard to read exception reports. This needs to be very English, customer service friendly. And so being able to configure and tailor the exceptions is very important. Again, it's something we need to do. Our system, again, supports 65 integrated transactions out of the box with NAV. You saw all of those or at least some of those referenced in the kind of flow in the very opening slides. We continue to add more as we see, the business benefit and as our customers, come to us with new scenarios. Very easy for us to add additional transactions. And then if you think about, the overall support, I'm sure there are very good EDI companies out there. And in today's world, obviously, quote unquote, everyone works with Microsoft. What sets Data Masons apart is we're not trying to be all things to all people. We focus on the Microsoft Dynamics community, again, certified by Microsoft for the NAV platform. And so not only understanding EDI, but I would argue more importantly, understanding, how NAV works and how these pieces go. Now, we do not implement NAV, so we're not quite to the level that obviously our friends over at Innovia is, but, being able to help tie those two together. Also, we're seeing more and more, and especially as kind of organizations think of the power of the cloud, a managed service approach. And so whether you deploy on-premise or you deploy in a cloud, we support both. We have the ability to also outsource your EDI operations, meaning, you could do just the technical end, fixed fee mapping for, the individual documents, but managed services in the context of actually running your EDI department, outsourcing the EDI coordinator role. Our team would reach out to your trading partners if there's an exception. We handle any errors or issues that come in through EDI, and we engage with your operations team if it's something that is NAV or ERP specific, so maybe master data, etc. So a true end-to-end solution, from a partner focused on Dynamics. And again, all of this around the notion of true scalability, both in the sense of performance, but also in regards to stability and other things that obviously are required. So my last slide, just doing a little bit of a time check, we'll try to kind of get into a little bit of the product here, is how does this all work? And so if you think about off to the left, the outside world, we've got our customers, et cetera. We've got an order coming in, maybe it's EDI, maybe it's XML, maybe it's flat file, maybe the communication is direct, such as AS2 or FTP, maybe it's through what's called a value-added network, VAN. Vantage Point supports all of those formats, all of those communications. And again, whether that's deployed in the cloud or deployed locally, Vantage Point, represented by the Data Masons logo in the middle, is playing traffic cop. So we're pulling all these transactions in, and we're going through a number of things, such as data enrichment and validations. And so we create a copy of the original transmission. We convert another copy to XML, and as you'll see here later on, the power of that is being able to index every single record, every single field from the original transmission. So there's not really a need to customize NAV to store these values if they don't add value to your process. And so as we go through creating the transaction, enriching that data with your part number, your customer number, maybe manipulating the transaction, splitting the order up, adding or removing line items based off of conditions. We use XML ports or OData web services to physically communicate, with the NAV, or as you'll see later, Dynamics 365 environment, to do that last mile integration, as we like to say, kind of give it to NAV on a silver platter, use the Microsoft, tools or APIs to physically create the record. You then execute pick, pack, and ship, for instance, in the case of an order, to then send back the outbound transmission, such as an ASN or an invoice or a PO acknowledgement. And again, technologies like SQL View or web services are leveraged. While all of that is occurring, handling what's called functional acknowledgements. So if my customer sent me a purchase order, I'm going to acknowledge I received the transmission. Same thing, if I send an invoice, I'm going to expect that to come back out. So with that, let's go ahead and sign into the system here. And we'll go through here for a quick second. Pause my screen here. I think my machine kind of just paused out here for a second. And we'll open up a live demonstration demonstration here of NAV. Okay. And so when this comes up, what we're going to do is we're going to actually run through a full cycle of the transmission. And we're going to take that transaction and we're going to have it kind of go through the full cycle here for us. Just taking a quick second. So, okay, perfect. And let me go ahead and get back to sharing my screen here. Apologize for the technical issue here. Okay, and flip over. Okay, perfect. So we should now be seeing NAV, and with that, what we're going to do is kind of walk through a life cycle. The reality of a integrated EDI system from Data Masons is I'm not actually in the EDI system, really on a day-to-day basis. The reality is I've got orders, coming into the system, and those orders are basically flowing in through all of the validation and business rules that need to occur. Now, that would make for a very boring EDI demonstration. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually kind of go under the covers and kind of walk through kind of what happens. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign in to Vantage Point. Now, Vantage Point has unlimited users, role-based security, so Azure Active Directory, et cetera, supporting things like single sign-on, et cetera. Now, because this is running in the background, the administrators, as they kind of connect in, the reality is we had 1,000 orders come in and we had various holds and critical alerts. Now, in my demonstration system, these numbers are a little bit higher. In a true production environment, typically these are 0. The mere fact that we had 1 or more means that there was something that required an action. And so as we would drill back into those, we see all of these are actually, kind of previous demonstrations where I've created transactions but didn't have a live partner to communicate with. But again, those alerts typically are supplemented by email notifications or text notifications, et cetera. Now, when we first deploy, we're going to say, boy, where is our NAV or Dynamics 365 system located? And within that implementation, what companies are EDI enabled? And by doing so, we're then able to say, who are our business partners? And so as I go through, I can set up my customers, my suppliers, my 3PLs, et cetera. And under those relationships, I can get into what transactions am I trading with them, various checkbox drop-down configuration business rules, again, eliminating a lot of the modifications that sometimes are needed in some of these other approaches. And as we go through defining, again, some of the individual transactions, the method of communication, the method of, the formatting of those documents. By making that relationship, I can now get into the fact that I now know, what's my part number to their part number, my address to their address, because we're able to read the Dynamics NAV system being able to tell us, that master data information. And so as we go through the day-to-day process, these exceptions and different things will occur. Now, I can go through and, manually, quote unquote, click the button and make those things happen. But the reality is, typically our system is automated with what we call our workflow scheduler. And so this automation, runs every X minutes or, event-based, and does things like go connect to our trading partners, receive the purchase orders, et cetera. And so we set up the various schedules that would occur every so many minutes, again, automatically, the various tasks that would occur, and we put those two things together in the notion of a workflow. And so that workflow tells us and directs us to say, what am I doing? Who gets notified? What are the exceptions? What's the parameters? So that I don't have to get into the notion of clicking the button. And so as these things occur, what's happening is we actually have transactions flowing into and out of the system. And so as I go into, for instance, our communication, here's an order that I've just created. And so that order, if we look at it, from an original EDI standpoint, this is again those raw EDI codes that we showed and talked about earlier. And so our system is then taking that message and converting it to an XML representation. So now we have every single record, every single field, but more importantly, we can see things like, aha, they sent over the BGO2. Well, what's that? That's the purchase order type code. Oh, well, they sent over a value of SA. What's that mean? Well, that's a standalone order. So again, probably not something customer service necessarily is going to look at, but your business analyst, your EDI administrator, just makes their life a little easier. If I did need to send off a human readable report, I can do that. If I needed to edit this transaction, in more of a traditional form view, in this case, kind of a header line item, we can do those things as well. Security to say who is allowed to see this, etc. All of that processing is also supported by the notion of the error checking. And so in our system, you can go through and actually create your own error messages. You can go through and personalize the name of the error, the description, and the solution. So wouldn't it be nice if step 1 do this, step 2 do that, step 3 do that? The system is actually walking you through how to actually correct the issue. But with that as kind of a backdrop, again, all of that, what I just showed you, is happening in the background. I didn't have to modify NAV to make EDI work. And so as I refresh the system, there's that new order that we just created. And so as I go through these steps, basically what's happening is I have an order that I need to pick, pack, and ship. Now, I'm going to oversimplify the process in NAV. Obviously, you're doing that on a day-to-day basis today. So we're going to simply go ahead and ship an invoice to this particular customer. Of note, our system is compatible with some of the leading WMS systems, as well as we do work with many of the shipping systems out there, such as eShip and some other areas that we can pull the data from. But what's going to happen is, as far as the EDI is concerned, we're picking that transaction up and we're actually sending it out to our business partners. Now, right from the NAV transaction, we do have the ability to drill back into what we call Transaction Lifecycle Explorer. And the concept of this, let me just actually open this up, is that this purchase order generated that advanced ship notice, which generated this invoice. And so if we did have situations where we short shipped, maybe had multiple ASNs, multiple invoices, maybe we had third-party logistics providers, all of that information would be shown here and we'd see the full life cycle. Now, I can see the functional acknowledgement status. I can get into reviewing any issues that's occurred. I can look at the raw EDI. I can actually look at the report. And all of that is being done, right from NAV through a web page that's basically hitting, your specific instance of this information. And so it's a great tool to empower, the operators of the business of the EDI-related information, again, without modifying the core NAV system. And so just very important. So with that backdrop, just a few other things that I did want to show here a little bit. And so again, the benefits of not modifying the core system, again, the value to you from what I've seen is, again, the challenges around inflexibility and delays. And so you get into non-compliance, this can impact revenue. It oftentimes the resources on your side, big areas. Again, if you're not familiar, Microsoft continues to make very large investments, in changing the way and the best practices in regards to how to personalize the NAV environment. what's called extensions. There was a 1.0 framework that had kind of limited kind of hooks, and now with extensions 2.0, really almost all things are kind of opened up. Those embedded designs, unfortunately, oftentimes don't take advantage of that Microsoft best practices, and again, just the higher cost to create, and then also now to link with your EDI system. Flexibility, less work. These are all things that, again, others have reported to us, in conversions that I think are very important. So, for instance, one of our larger customers, they do over 150,000 orders annually, and this continues to grow. And so what they had seen in regards to kind of some embedded issues is, again, some of the concepts that we've kind of talked about. But by moving over to the Data Mason solution, they were able to significantly increase the number of trading partners that they were working with, the electronic volume that they were working with, and again, most importantly, being able to reduce that overall operating expense. And so for them, having visibility, being able to automate more transactions was just, again, another reason to integrate EDI, and again, in their case, take that non-embedded approach. So the last thing I wanted to kind of talk about here a little bit before we open it up to Q&A is, as you may or may not know, Microsoft is moving Dynamics NAV to the options of what's called Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central. And so this is the roadmap that basically they have published. And so as we can see here, kind of in that spring, summer timeframe, Microsoft has released Dynamics 365 Business Central, basically, which is the hosted or cloud option. Continues to make the update to Dynamics NAV 2018. So, with the system, FYI, we actually go back all the way to NAV version 5. So really almost anyone that's in current maintenance with Microsoft or even a few years out, what I've showed you here today, would be able to work with you. But as we go towards the fall, Microsoft is expected to release the Dynamics 365 Business Central on-premise option, where you can, again, do that in a hosted or on-premise environment, or again, have Microsoft host this within Azure. With our team, we are able to work with you, and so the same Vantage Point solution that we're showing here, being able to leverage, the new ERP. And so if you do have any questions or interests, again, just let the Innovia team know, and we'll definitely be able to assist. So with that, I definitely want to thank everyone for your time. I see a note here. It looks like we do have some questions, and we'll go through just some of the questions that have been asked.
All right, thank you, Brian. First question is, what deployment options do you support, such as cloud, or are you only on-premise?
Okay. Yeah, so that's a great question, especially as Microsoft, is opening up more and more options. And so as we talk a little bit about, we actually do support, cloud, hosted, or on-premise. And the other thing of note is that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be exactly as your NAV or Dynamics 365 deployment. So we have perpetual and subscription licensing models. And then from a deployment model, again, all three of those are supported. And so we have implementations where maybe for whatever reason, they have elected to do an on-premise EDI, but have Microsoft NAV hosted, or again, where NAV might be hosted and EDI is in the cloud. A lot of times you'll see those typically paired up. So if NAV's in the cloud, EDI is in the cloud as well. But again, all of those models are supported.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Can I do my own mapping?
You can. And so we're very flexible in how we work with our customers. So I'd probably say, pretty significant amount of our customers do elect to outsource their mapping, but they're leveraging the tool that our team uses, which is our universal data translator. And so to the person that asked that question, absolutely, you have the ability to license the same exact mapper that my team uses. And what's nice about it, it's not your traditional left and right mapper. These are predefined business rules, again, hooks for NAV, as well as some of the other Microsoft ERP options. And so a lot of times you're able to kind of configure the mapping versus having to build it yourself. But then if you do go down that path and for whatever reason you need help on a map or do want to outsource on an individual map basis, we do support hybrid approaches. So again, that's been a great option for many of our customers, as they're kind of transitioning, out of maybe a different ERP or upgrading, from a past NAV version.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what is the pricing?
Sure, you definitely was expecting that a little bit. So as you can imagine, EDI is a little bit of a configured item. So the short answer is, unfortunately, it does depend. But let me give you a few parameters. And so when we are helping organizations price out our solution, some of the factors that go into that is, what type of entities are you trading with, meaning customers, suppliers, 3PLs. Then how many business partners and individual documents per business partner? That's really your largest variation of cost. And then from there, obviously what sort of testing assistance that you want to do. And so our system would start off at probably a $20,000 plus investment range, for that kind of simple single partner kind of relationship and perpetual. Again, we also do support subscriptions, and so those start off, I think, somewhere in about the $400 to $500 a month range. So it can be very economical for organizations to start off with EDI, but again, the organization that has the 160 trading partners, all requiring different mapping, obviously there's just going to be a little larger investment. Hopefully that helps, and if not, the person can just follow up and a follow-up here with our information.
Okay, thank you. Next question, do you offer support in the European time zone?
Okay, great. Yeah, actually, we offer global support. So we definitely see, and as Microsoft sees, really a globalization of organizations that are using, the Microsoft Dynamics suite of products. And so we have positioned ourselves both functionally, meaning language supported, and have time to show some of that, but also in regards to just the staffing. And so we have team members literally worldwide ready to cover 24/7 support if that's needed. Specifically to the European question, we have members right there in Europe, basically, able to assist, again, supported by some of our other overall global team members.
Thank you. And the other question that we have is, what versions of NAV does Vantage Point support?
Sure. So officially, we go back all the way to version 5. I'd say probably the majority of the customers we're seeing today, NAV 2013 and up. But again, officially, we go back all the way to version 5. And again, with Business Central, as that becomes more and more available, again, something we're able to help with as well.
Okay, I think that's all that we have. If anyone has any further questions and would like to speak to us, go ahead and contact us. I will note our phone number, there's a typo, it's 800-834-7700, or you can send us an email at sales@innovia.com. So we'd be more than happy to discuss your questions that you have. All right, well, thank you, Brian, for presenting. It was very informative, and I thank everyone who attended this webinar.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us here today. Again, thank you for everyone that's taken the time to watch it. again, just contact your team there if there are any questions, and we can kind of engage as needed. But again, hopefully this helps as you think about, adding an EDI program, or again, if you're doing EDI today.
All right, well, great. Again, this has been recorded, so it will be available on our website later this week for you to review again or share with anyone who is interested. And I just want to invite you to go to our website and check out our events tab, innovia.com, and it's the events tab that's up on the upper right-hand corner. We have webinars that are always being added, and we have one coming up tomorrow on Dimensions 101. Innovia's Mark Kane will be presenting on Dimensions 101. And then we have a couple of webinars in June that we will be hosting. So check those out on our website, June 7th and June 19th. Again, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it very much, and we look forward to seeing you on one of our next webinars. Have a great day, everyone.